Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome once again to our state sponsorship webinar series. I hope you're all well wherever you are in the world and keeping safe. Today, we're doing a deep dive into some particular occupations, and we'll take a look at the specific criteria for those, so that you can, as you know, we're on a mission, so that you can make a decision about what you're going to do about your future to get your golden ticket for an Aussie visa. And as usual, my team and I are here to guide you through the process. So let's just recap why we are here in this third session. So in the general skilled migration, you've nominated your occupation and obtained a favourable skills assessment. You've got your competent English and you've submitted an EOI with 65 points, either 65 points all by yourself or including the state sponsorship points. Once you are at this stage, then you're able to access state sponsorship opportunities. Please do go back if you haven't looked at the second webinar to understand all the criteria. And I think a great resource for you will be this state sponsorship guide, which we made available to you recently. So the other context is the occupation lists, or are the occupation lists. And it's important to understand how these play a part in the whole state sponsorship program. So there are three lists. The first is the medium and long-term skills shortage list. And that allows candidates to obtain the 189 independent visa. But if your occupation is on the MLT SSL, you may also seek state sponsorship. So you have the choice. Whereas if your occupation is on the short-term skilled occupation list, you must obtain a state sponsorship. So for the medium and long-term people, they can access the high point strategy or the state sponsorship, but with the STSOL candidates, you must obtain a state sponsorship or your application can never progress. And then there is a third list, the priority migration skilled occupation list. This list is indicative of the occupations the government feels are COVID urgent right now to ensure the Australian economy progresses, and candidates with occupations on those lists will get priority processing. Also, if your occupation is on the PMSOL, then regardless of whether you are onshore in Australia or offshore, your application can be processed. Whereas if your application is not on that list and you are overseas, meaning outside Australia, you are unlikely to be issued with a visa invitation. So currently candidates onshore are being preferenced, and also those with occupations on the PMSOL. The other thing to understand is the occupational quotas. Unfortunately, these are not yet available for FY22, because if you look at those occupational quotas, and really it's a cap rather than a quota that must be filled, they indicate where the government is seeing the priorities. So we would expect the PMSOL occupations to have a large quota. But once those quotas, those occupational quotas are available, we'll be able to analyse that a bit further. And then each state, again, has its own quota. So for each occupation, they have a maximum number of positions that they are able to sponsor. That data is not generally available, although some states may make it available. So often we're flying a little bit blind when we're looking at applying for state sponsorship, not knowing how many other candidates there are and how many positions all are fighting for. So today we're covering these occupations. Now, even if your occupation is not on this list, you may get some valuable insight into the way the states are delivering their programs. So please hang in there. And if one of these is your occupation, because you've written in and asked us to talk about these, then you'll get a lot of nitty-gritty. So let's get started, starting with accountant. So just a bit of an occupation overview. To get the skills assessment as an accountant, you would have a bachelor or a higher degree that has at least 7 required accounting subjects. And you would either have proficient English, equivalent to IELTS 7, or if you've studied in Australia, the professional year. Now, for those who have proficient English, you'll see that that's already going to be an advantage, not only for points, but in terms of selection. The occupation is on the medium and long term and the priority list. Last year, there was a quota of 1,000. This year, as I said, no data available yet. And here are the states in which the occupation is available for sponsorship. So if we start with the ACT, you must live and work in the ACT for either 3 or 6 months. For the 491 visa, you only need to have worked part-time. So that work could have been undertaken on a student visa, whereas for the 190 visa, the work must be full-time. So you would need to have had a post-student visa, such as the 485 or a working visa, in order to achieve that full-time work. And in the July round, yes, ACT has got off the mark really quickly. And on the 14th of July, they had their first round. Candidates needed to acquire 100 matrix points to be selected. And please refer back to the webinar number 2 and the material provided in the guide. Victoria, you must be working in a target sector. So even if you're an accountant, if you're working in the health sector, you may be eligible for state sponsorship. Northern Territory, both visas are available. You must have lived in the NT for 12 months. That could have been on a working visa, on a student visa, even could have been on a working holiday visa. And you must have completed 6 months full-time work. So again, you would need the postgraduate visa, sponsored working visa, or even the working holiday visa to meet that requirement. And there's also offshore available if you've got a job offer. And here you'll see the minimum IELTS 7, which is the proficient English, but that's part of the skills assessment anyway. So if you're offshore, you should already have that. The occupation is also available in WA in the general stream, and you need not even have lived, worked, studied, or have any particular ties to Australia, to Western Australia already, but you must have a job offer. So if you're living in Sydney, but you have a job offer as an accountant in Perth, then good luck to you. And South Australia, which you'll find has the most complex web of opportunities, but it's complex because they have a broad range of opportunities. South Australia requires you to be living in South Australia and have work experience. So if you've not studied in South Australia, then you need 2 years work in Adelaide or 1 year in a regional area. But if you've studied, that reduces to 12 months in Adelaide or 6 months in a regional area. So again, any of the postgraduate visas or work-sponsored visas would allow you to undertake that work. For the permanent residents, for this occupation, you must fall into one of the streams of the Talent and Innovators program. So you've either got high points of 95, which if you're onshore and have studied in Australia should be possible, but also an extensive career, which perhaps is more applicable to offshore candidates. Or you're working in a growth sector. Those sectors were mentioned in our previous webinar, earning the level of salary you can see there. Or you've got a startup business. So quite a broad range of opportunities there for SA, mostly for the 491 temporary visa. And New South Wales has not yet got its list available, so it's a little disappointing that the largest state hasn't got their act together quite yet, but we would be expecting that New South Wales would also have opportunities for accountant in due course. But there is opportunities in those other states, mostly if you're living there or working or have a job offer. So our next occupation is chef. And the skills assessment requirement for this occupation is a package of at least 5 years qualification and experience. So candidates need not necessarily have a qualification, but would then need to make up the 5 years with experience, or they may have a mix of both. Like accountant, this occupation is on both the medium and long-term and the priority list. Last year, 2,256 places, so twice as many as the accountants. And currently, these are the availabilities. In ACT, living and working, similar to the accountant, or you have your own business. And in the July round, chefs only needed 65 points. So that is quite achievable, especially if you have been living and working and in the ACT and have quite good English language ability. Northern Territory has availability across the 2 streams of graduate, and you must have studied in the Northern Territory in a tertiary program. So that would, if you've been an international student studying cookery, that is a vocational program. So it doesn't really fit well with the graduate stream. Or in the resident stream, you've lived there for 2 years and you've been working as well. A little bit more difficult to meet that requirement. WA has general and graduate schemes available for chefs. Again, for the general stream for WA, job offer will be enough. In the graduate stream, you must have studied in WA for 2 years. So for graduates, there is a good pathway. Otherwise, anywhere else in Australia with a job offer in WA, you may seek sponsorship. Excuse me. South Australia has wide opportunities for chefs. For the permanent residents 190, you must have been working there for the last 18 months, but note that that could be part-time. So even as a student, if you'd already finished your certificate course, you may be able to get part-time work and claim that. If it's in outer regional area though. For the 491, the work could be in Adelaide. So South Australia, you'll find, has a lot of opportunities and more pushing towards the 491 visa, and they have a much larger quota for the 491. There's also the graduate program. So again, for the permanent 190, it's a bit more difficult, but for the 491 visa, you must have been working, and again, could be part-time for 12 months in Adelaide. So if you've studied in Adelaide or you're on your post-study visa and you've worked at least 12 months part-time in Adelaide, you would be eligible for the 491 sponsorship. Otherwise, if you fall within the Talent and Innovators program, you could seek a sponsorship. Restaurant managers. The skill assessment for this occupation is at least a diploma qualification with 1 year experience within the past 5 years. Achievable by both offshore and onshore candidates. This occupation is only on the short-term list, so it must have a state sponsorship in order to progress to get the visa invitation. There's no quotas for occupations on the short-term list. And here are the state availabilities. Now, in Tasmania, there is availability for cafe and restaurant managers, 3 years post-qualification experience. Northern Territory, available in all the streams. whether you're living in Australia or overseas. ACT, living and working at least part-time 3 months, would get you the temporary 491 visa and a matrix point in July of 75 points, which would probably mean that you've had a little bit more work experience. Western Australia has both streams available. So again, in the general stream, you may never have been to Western Australia before, but if you have a job offer, you may be eligible. Note here that you do need proficient English. Makes sense if you're dealing with customers. And in the graduate stream for Western Australia, you've lived and worked there you've studied in WA for 2 years. You may have moved out of WA to one of the eastern states and got work experience, or you have a job offer in WA. South Australia, as I mentioned before, for the 190, it's quite difficult in that in the living and working stream, you must have worked in outer regional SA. And in the graduate stream, still must have worked in outer regional SA for a shorter period of time. So there's a little concession there. But the 491, if you've worked for 12 months in Adelaide or 6 months in an outer region, you would be eligible for state sponsorship. And if you're a graduate, that reduces to 6 months or 3 months. And once again, Talent and Innovators program available for this occupation, and indeed for most occupations in South Australia. Our next occupation is early childhood teacher, where the skills assessment requirement is a bachelor degree, including certain subjects, and the requirement that the student has, as part of the course, undertaken some practical teaching in a school, and proficient and superior English is required across the 4 elements of the English test. So already teachers will have high points, should have quite high points. The occupations on the medium and long-term list. And look at the quota for 2021 was very high, 3,000. So that's 3 times as many as the accountants. So high demand last year across the country. It will be interesting to see the quota for this year. And current availability is shown on the table. Now, Tasmania is interested in candidates who've got 3 years experience in a school in which the language or the medium of instruction was English. So onshore students might have difficulty acquiring the 3 years experience. Offshore candidates must have been employed in the English-speaking environment. Otherwise, that's a fairly straightforward criterion. Northern Territory, if you've studied there, you're living there, you've got a job offer, all available in Northern Territory. In WA, proficient English, which you should have via the skills assessment process, and a job offer. ACT, living and working 3 or 6 months. Small business owner, less likely to be an opportunity for this occupation. None were invited in this most recent round for ACT. South Australia has greater interest in this occupation than the ones we've looked at previously. And you can see that in the 190, where the work experience can be in Adelaide. So 12 months in Adelaide or 6 months in a regional area for the permanent residence visa in the living and working stream. And for the 491 visa, that work experience cuts down to only 6 months. For the graduate stream, if you have completed a bachelor or higher degree in South Australia, even if you've transferred after a semester from another state, and you're currently working for 3 months, you may be eligible. So for the permanent residents, 12 months, for the 491, 6 months, and for the graduate stream, 3 months. So ex-students of SA have great opportunities there. And also the Talent and Innovators program is available, more likely to be relevant in the independent talent stream for offshore candidates. Childcare Centre Manager has been a popular occupation, requires a diploma and 3 years experience for the skills assessment. So for onshore candidates, a little bit more difficult to achieve, not impossible if you have the right strategy. The occupation is on the medium and long term and the priority list. So candidates from both Australia and overseas will be invited. But a small number available last year. And not a great deal of spread across Australia. Again, hoping this will be on the New South Wales list in due course. In Northern Territory, available if you've studied, lived, worked there or job offer. Western Australia, proficient English and a job offer will allow you to get a sponsorship, but living in regional area only. So that would be for the 491 visa. South Australia, again, similar to the early childhood education teacher, the work experience for the permanent can be in Adelaide only. So 12 months in Adelaide, 6 months in region, in the living and working stream. And for the 491 visa, just 6 months work experience would be sufficient. Of course, remember that for the skills assessment, you must have the 3 years behind you as well. And for the graduate stream, again, reduced work experience, only 3 months required. And as usual for South Australia, Talent and Innovators program is available. Software engineer. Requirement for the skills assessment, a bachelor or higher degree with relevant content and work experience. Also, irrelevant bachelor degree with more work experience, no bachelor degree and more work experience. Or if the study has been undertaken in Australia, instead of experience, the professional year would suffice to get the skills assessment. So you could proceed in this application with qualification and professional year and absolutely no work experience. This occupation of software engineer is on the medium and long term and the priority list. And the quota for last year was 8,000 for the group, and software engineer falls within a group of 3 or 4 occupations. So for that group of occupations, 8,000 visas were available. Quite strongly in demand across the country. Again, we would be expecting that to fall on the New South Wales list in due course. So ACT, as usual, 3 or 6 months work experience and quite a low matrix point selection in July. So that's quite encouraging, especially for onshore candidates. For Northern Territory, you must be living in the Northern Territory already for a year with 6 months work experience full-time. So that might suit someone who has studied in Northern Territory and then obtained the post-study visa, or has come up to Northern Territory on the 485 visa, or even an employer-sponsored visa. Given that work opportunities are probably going to be quite low in this occupation in Northern Territory, probably this will align mostly with those who already have a job. And if you have a job offer and you are offshore, that will be enough. Western Australia, also available. Again, you must be living in Australia. So for Western Australia, no offshore candidates, only available in regional areas, which probably means not a lot of job opportunities. So therefore you must have a job offer. and the higher level of English, proficient English. Victoria is also sponsoring software engineers if the candidate is already working in one of the target sectors. So Victoria, as you may remember from the last webinar and our guide, is only sponsoring onshore candidates. And South Australia, again, looking for or offering, willing to offer permanent residence nomination for work in Adelaide only, but in this case, 2 years of work. So quite a lot of work in Adelaide or 12 months in a regional area. Cut that by half for the 491 visa. And in the graduate stream, you've studied at least a year course with half of it in SA. You finished the course in SA and you've been working, for as little as 3 months for the 491 temporary visa. So if you've studied in SA and you've loved it there and you've got a job, then the 491 visa should be quite available to you. The Talent and Innovators program also available, and the employment stream may be viable here. So you're working in a growth sector and earning at least 80K, which you would expect for quite a large business, that may be a program available to you. So that may be what you're feeling right now because it's still a lot of choices. So how do you move forward from here? You need to determine your own personal priorities. What are you trying to achieve? What's your goal? What's your time frame? What's your budget? And how willing are you to be flexible in terms of moving geographically, striving to get work, etc. Once you know your priorities, then you explore your options. Where could you go and which visas are available to you? Then you can rank your preferences. So the most preferable might be staying in the state you are in at the moment without having to move, down to moving to a less desirable state. And once you've ranked your preferences, you do need to make a decision and take action. So you can't just look at your list and hope something will happen. You need to take the next step. Now, we are going to go into this in more detail next time when we're talking about actual strategies for success. So drilling down into all the steps, how you can make the decisions and, hopefully finding a solution and hopefully a couple of options to make a decision from that's going to suit you. Remembering that things can change at any time, so you may also need to keep in mind the time frame in which you can achieve an outcome. As usual, we're here to help you find that right path, and feel free to use your discount voucher to book in for a consultation with me to talk about your specific circumstances and your occupation. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time, next Wednesday, in the final of this series, when we're going to look into those strategies for success. So thanks again for attending today. It's been great having you here. Please feel free when you get the link to share this recording with your friends or colleagues, and also the state sponsorship guide, and keeping fingers crossed that there will be a pathway available just for you. Thanks, stay safe, and see you next week. Bye.